Hey everybody, glad you're here. This is the Chase Squirrelson Show, and I'm your host, Chase Squirrelson. And if you're listening right now, you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Today's episode is one of those conversations that starts simple and then goes somewhere interesting. So let's jump in. Today I want to talk about what would things be like if ADHD people were responsible for it, and especially when it comes to something technical that requires engineering, etc. And I came up with an idea, and it actually reminds me, Yogi Berra, the famous New York Yankee catcher, once said, if you don't know where you're going, you'll probably end up someplace. And that's what it's like sometimes to be a guy with ADHD. So the thought occurred to me, what if a team of ADHD people built the Golden Gate Bridge? Yes, the Golden Gate Bridge. Yes, the Golden Gate Bridge would still get built, but it would take 6 false starts, 3 side projects, and numerous emotional breakdowns at Home Depot. On day 1, they would discover that the blueprints were lost. That's a given. On day 2, the project idea whiteboard would have been covered with arrows and partially erased ideas. On day 3, after several injuries and fatalities, someone discovers the use of a safety net, totally by accident. The sad thing is that the ADHD brain was told early on in life that we are bumbling and incapable. But we possess disconnected brilliance with a very peculiar logic. Of course, next would come the planning phase. Instead of a master plan, one person using his gift of hyperfocus designs 90% of the bridge in one night. Another says, what if it curved more? A third person is conducting an in-depth research on how bridges were built more than 400 years ago, including the construction of the Great Wall of China. A fourth person is stuck choosing fonts for the proposal. Eventually, we'll decide later is said 47 times per hour, but realistically means never. Planning for us is hard. Having vision is not. The bridge exists in everyone's head, just not on paper yet. Next, hyperfocus mode kicks in. This is where ADHD absolutely dominates the process. What goes right is almost insane problem solving under enormous pressure. Is there a wind problem? Someone who hasn't slept in 36 hours now has a solution. Structural issues solved at 3:14 a.m. with coffee and righteous fury. The team doesn't lack focus. It lacks an off switch. What's critical to point out is that once the stakes are real and the deadline is terrifying, ADHD brains lock in like anxious Navy SEALs. Then, of course, comes the inevitable time blindness and scheduling disasters. They are only 6 months behind, which to them is basically on time. Everyone is shocked. It's suddenly winter. Meetings start late, end early, and solve nothing, but somehow feel productive. In the middle of the conference room, there is a giant wall calendar where every deadline is circled and then crossed out. 35 coffee and donut stained sticky notes are scattered all over the place with the word urgent. For ADHDers, time isn't linear. It's vibes plus panic. Then there's the safety, risk, and accidental genius moment. Interestingly enough, the real Golden Gate Bridge pioneered safety nets, saving lives. It actually did. That was the first time safety nets were ever used. But the ADHD engineer wasn't trying to save lives. He was trying to stop the work from getting shut down by the authorities. He was thinking, we're losing workers. Or if one more guy falls, this whole project gets halted. Or if the bridge gets shut down, everything collapses. Timelines, our pay, and reputations. So his real goal was how to keep this thing moving. Saving lives was the byproduct, not the mission. Why is this decision such a quintessential ADHD moment? ADHD brains are good at finding practical fixes, but not perfect or long-term solutions. We like to reduce big problems to one solvable move. And we like to act before bureaucracy catches up with us. So we're good at optimizing for momentum, but not elegance. A thought might not necessarily be noble, but it was functional. So history will remember that the net idea saved lives, but they won't recognize that the motivation was not to let the project die. Many people with ADHD think that if they are not motivated by big or noble ideals, something's wrong with them. We only act out of desperation or when things are on fire. Although the invention of the safety net was not born of any noble or humane ideal, it kept the project going and became a historic change in construction safety history. So, ADHD does not equal disorder. It's a different operating system. The episode isn't ADHD, people are bad at building bridges. It's actually they don't build bridges the normal way, but they still get them built. So there is the same outcome with a wildly different process. Another way of describing things is that nonlinear work can still produce monumental results. Neurotypical people plan, they execute, and they finish. ADHD people obsess, drift, panic, hyperfocus, solve, and actually forget how we did it. But no matter what, the bridge still stood either way. So the way I'm gently roasting those of us with ADHD and defending us at the same time. So for people with ADHD, urgency is the real project manager. The true boss of the ADHD team isn't a foreman, it's deadlines, danger, high stakes, and the fear of public humiliation. The bridge doesn't get built despite pressure, it gets built because of it. So for us, structure is discovered, not designed. Neurotypical teams design structure first. ADHD teams trip over structure, accidentally reverse engineer it, and then pretend that it was the plan all along. Metaphorically, this ties beautifully to the Golden Gate Bridge project because it was built in fog, high winds, and built where people said it couldn't be done. The bridge reveals an ADHD superpower, which could be called adaptive intelligence. There's a deeper message without necessarily preaching it. We have brains that are phenomenal in environments where problems change, conditions are hostile, rules are incomplete, and failure is visible, which is exactly where great things tend to get built. For us, messy doesn't mean broken. It just means the order comes later. In many ways, the world was built by people who didn't fit the job description, which in a way mocks bureaucracy and praises weirdness, and it validates late bloomers. In the case of the Golden Gate Bridge safety net, ADHD was historically useful, not defective. Nonlinear brilliance for us is how our thinking works. Neurotypicals think like this. Step 1 leads to step 2, followed by step 3, and then the project is finished. ADHD thinking looks more like step 1, random thought leads to big insight, then to a side idea, and then an aha moment, and then back to step 2. It jumps around, but those jumps often connect dots that other people wouldn't even see. So we tend to spot patterns quickly, make unexpected connections, solve problems sideways rather than straight on, and then leap to the right answer without being able to explain every step of how we got there. That's the brilliant part. What happens to people with ADHD is our questionable logistics. Oftentimes, our projects can fall apart. Let's face it, logistics are boring, but a necessary part of building anything. Any construction project requires boring but necessary logistics, including planning, scheduling, paperwork, remembering what day it is, and following a process exactly as written. But for ADHD brains, time feels slippery. Details get dropped. Doing it later feels reasonable until it isn't. So the idea is clear, but the execution is very messy. So we can have a great idea but miss the critical deadline, or solve the hardest problem and forget to send the email telling anyone we did it, or doing amazing work in bursts, then stall on the follow-through. Imagine a neurotypical person trying to fix a broken fence. They would first measure, then they would buy the wood, they would cut it, and then install it. But the ADHD approach would be decidedly different. First, we would notice the fence, and then remember a better fence that we once saw when we were kids. and then invent a clever fix and build something surprisingly strong, and then realize we forgot to buy the proper screws to put it together. But we finish it anyway using simple zip ties. Somehow the fence still stands, but we just didn't follow the traditional way of fixing it. It is important not to miss the key takeaway of this example. It does not mean we are lazy, careless, or unintelligent. Rather, it means we are great at solving problems, but not at managing the process. Or even simpler, we have a strong edge and with a weak GPS system. Getting back to the construction of the Golden Gate Bridge, it wouldn't have surprised me at all if they hadn't started building that bridge and had instead become distracted and decided to try to build the Hoover Dam. For people with ADHD, a project is often abandoned just before it gets boring. And in fact, we have an uncanny ability to stop before the boring part begins. For me, here is what unfinished projects look like. I could get lucky and design a fantastic system with no instructions. I could write a 10-chapter book outline and later discover I'm missing chapter 7. I once had a half-built shelf in my basement that was temporarily on the floor for 3 years. I even had a business idea with a logo and a website with no customers because I never got around to marketing it. I also had a very clever idea about an invention, and that was 15 years ago, and I never got around to even investigating how to do it. More recently, I lost all the printed copies of the podcasts I've done so far. So what it comes down to is I often do the very hardest part of a project, but then I find the finish line is emotionally unbearable. I love starting projects, imagining them, solving them, and creating them, but I absolutely loathe repetition, cleanup, administration, the final polishing, and just doing the one small last thing. It's like my brain says, the interesting problem is solved, so why am I still here? Neurotypical people think that the start is the hard part, but for people with ADHD, the end is the hard part. We get the dopamine from the start, but the finish is boring. It would be easy for me to imagine my home as a museum called the Almost Museum. On existence would be evidence of a partially written book, a guitar I never got around to learning to play, an unfinished business plan, and the debris of an unfinished reorganization of a basement closet. There could even be guided tours and a gift shop that was never finished, of course. What I think is very important for you to understand is that unfinished projects don't mean failure, laziness, or lack of discipline. What it means is that the brain stopped getting rewarded before the tasks stopped requiring work. That's really what happens. There is no moral flaw. So let's flip this and reframe it. People with ADHD are exceptional at beginnings. They just need external systems for endings. That solution can lead naturally to deadlines, accountability partners, public commitments, artificial urgency, and someone to help us close the loop. People with ADHD are prone to opening tabs, but not great at closing them. If enthusiasm were enough, every person with ADHD would be wildly successful. I have never quit a project because, in my mind, I emotionally completed it. The project was completed in my head, but there would be no evidence for the world to see it. And anybody who thinks that ADHD people can't be successful, if not spectacularly so, there are many examples. Just to name a few, Leonardo da Vinci, Albert Einstein, and Thomas Edison. Let's not forget Nikola Tesla. How about Alexander the Great, Theodore Roosevelt, Winston Churchill, Vincent van Gogh, Ernest Hemingway, and Mark Twain? Yes, they all had many of the traits of people with ADHD. Another thing to remember is that people who didn't finish things were also spectacularly successful. Besides Da Vinci, who had numerous unfinished projects, have you ever heard of Franz Schubert, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, and Peter Tchaikovsky? Just to name a few. They are remembered not for the unfinished symphonies they wrote, but are immortal for the magnificent symphonies they did. Speaking of unfinished, it is a fact that many unfinished works of art, architecture, and other endeavors are extraordinarily revered. Examples include Antoni Gaudi's Sagrada Familia in Barcelona, the Cologne Cathedral in Germany, the Hassan Tower in Morocco, the Crazy Horse Memorial in South Dakota, Da Vinci's Adoration of the Magi, and Michelangelo's Prisoners sculpture. All of them are enormously successful tourist attractions. Even the far less than famous myself is much better off because I left things unfinished, namely my grandmother's meals. If I finished those, I would now weigh 500 pounds. So here's the thing about the Golden Gate Bridge. If you zoom out, it looks like pure elegance, clean lines, bold vision, timeless beauty. But if you zoom in, what you find is chaos, wind, fog, failed ideas, partial collapses, arguments, and people saying this can't be done. And honestly, that's an ADHD brain on a good day. If you remember my triangle, Soloman was at the top of it, watching, adjusting, and deciding when to listen to the dream and when to rein it in. Marcus had to show up to do the boring math, tighten the bolts, show up every single day when the excitement wore off. And my Ziggy was absolutely there, chasing the impossible idea, obsessed with scale, saying, what if we just built it anyway? ADHD doesn't fail because of chaos. It fails when chaos drives without awareness. When Ziggy is in charge alone, you get unfinished bridges. When Marcus runs everything, nothing bold ever gets built. The magic happens when Soloman is watching the whole triangle and saying, now, this idea gets time. That impulse can wait, and this bolt, tighten it right away. So the question isn't, do you have ADHD? The real question is, who's driving the car today? So my friends, if people can build a bridge in that wind and fog, you can probably build a pretty damn good life too. If this episode hit home, don't keep it to yourself. Send it to someone who'd get it. You can follow the show so you don't miss the next conversation. And if you feel like it, a quick rating helps the show a great deal. Either way, I appreciate you being here. We'll talk soon.
This podcast is for informational purposes only. The content reflects personal experiences and opinions and is not a substitute for professional medical, psychological, mental health, or legal advice. Flint Rock LLC, the hosts, and guests make no representation or warranties and assume no liability for decisions or actions taken based on this content. Always consult a qualified professional regarding your own situation.